Hello and welcome back to The Big Rishi, the podcast where we're tracking the first 100 days of Rishi Sunak's premiership and seeing if he does what he said he would. Joining me today are Editor-in-Chief Jack Michaelis.
Hello.
And our social media coordinator, Rory Taylor.
Hello.
How are you both doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah,
not too
lovely
bad.
weather today.
Lovely
It is a
weather
nice
today.
day and it's a Friday. It doesn't get much better than that.
The autumn statement was this week. That was the kind of financial statement from the Chancellor. He's obviously made previous statements. He's rolled back commitments from the Truss era, etc. But this was one of his first opportunities to really set out his stall for what him and the Sunak government are planning on doing. So would you mind, as we've not done a full video on it yet, running us through kind of what some of the main announcements were?
Yeah, I'll try my best. I think his announcement was about an hour long, so I'll try and do it a bit quicker than that.
I don't know.
We'll see.
I've got other stuff to do, Rory, so
yeah, I'll
2.5
still be here and everyone
minutes.
else has gone.
I can go and come back if you want.
Yeah, that might be good. Basically, there are about £55 billion worth of tax rises and spending cuts. So a huge package of measures and announcements. Just to quickly go over some of the big ones. Thresholds for income tax, national insurance, inheritance tax were all frozen for a further 2 years until April 2028.
Yeah.
These are the kind of stealth taxes a lot of people were talking about and expecting. Also on tax, they've reduced the threshold for the top rate of income tax, the 45% one, from £150,000 to about £125,000. So more people will pay that top tax rate.
Yeah.
They're going to cut the tax-free allowance for dividend and capital gains taxes next year and in 2024. They're going to allow local councils to raise council taxes by from 3% to 5%. They've also frozen the threshold for VAT for business until 2026. These freezing of thresholds are the kind of stealth taxes, which just mean more people will pay more tax over time effectively. Yeah,
because if you're freezing the rate at its current level and anything under that rate you don't have to pay tax on, as inflation happens and as you naturally get more money, then
in real terms
the real term percentage is shrinking.
So that's the kind of main tax announcements. There was also the one on electric vehicles. So from
Ben's going to be gutted.
Yes.
Ben loves talking about tax on electric vehicles. It's a niche thing, and I don't think the audience will believe us.
No.
But this is one of Ben's real passions.
Yeah. So from April 2025, electric vehicles are not going to be exempt from road tax anymore.
Yeah.
So those are the main tax measures.
Okay.
He also didn't mention it, but on that note, fuel duty is also going up quite significantly.
I saw something about that. That was kind of hidden away in the OBR report.
Basically, every government since about 2010 has planned on increasing fuel duty, and no one's done it for fear of angry car drivers.
So this one might.
Yes, this one probably will. Well, they seem to like they snuck it in there.
Interesting.
So pretty much across the board, tax rises, right?
Yeah.
We saw a lot of tax cuts just a month or so ago. And now we're seeing kind of tax rises for basically everyone in the form of the stealth taxes.
Yeah.
Some additional taxes for the highest earners, pulling more people into that highest earning bracket. Businesses obviously getting roped in with dividends and capital gains, or business owners at least. Everyone being roped into increased council tax. VAT obviously impacts everyone, and electric car drivers too.
Bit of relief for businesses in business rates though. So sort of
that's nice.
Didn't
know about that.
Don't get too stressed out about it. There you go.
Lovely. So kind of taxes going up across the board.
Yeah.
Does that mean we're going to get more fun stuff? Is the NHS suddenly going to be all shiny and new?
Not necessarily. I'll be careful with my language. They did commit to for the NHS to increase the budget by £3.3 billion a year for the next 2 years, and for schools £2.3 billion for the same time frame. And so when it comes to the spending, the main thing that they've done is plan ahead for the next 2 years with these extra money. But beyond that, that's when the spending cuts or the planned cuts come in, or spending squeezes, I think they refer to them as generally.
So when we're looking at those kind of increases, and you might not know the answer to this question, but when you're looking at kind of 3% for health, 3 billion for health, 2 billion for education roughly, is that actually an increase in real terms, or is that really just making up for previous shortfalls and kind of inflationary
Oh, you're looking
I'm
at
looking
me.
at you, Zach.
I think actually, so I think
Go on,
year
give it a
on year,
guess.
I think year on year it is an increase in real
Okay.
terms. Oh, I'm bluffing here. I think it's right from what I remember from the statement. So I think it is year on year,
Okay.
an increase in real terms. What is interesting is that, as we mentioned a second ago, Hunt has said that he plans to basically cut public spending from 2024 onwards.
Okay.
And given that both education and health have been de facto ring fenced, that means that it's the equivalent of about £20 billion worth less a year. That means that level of cuts is going to have to fall on stuff like transport,
Sure.
policing, local government, sort of
Defence.
small things like that. Defence again, I think
They've made the
politically.
2% commitment for defence.
Okay, so unlikely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so although there are accounting tricks you can use to inflate your defence spending. So, for example, in the last couple of years, we've started including defence pensioners in defence, like
defensioners.
ex-personnel pensions in there, and that's sort of slightly inflated our GDP, our defence spending
Sure.
in GDP terms.
2024, what's the kind of logic behind increasing for the next couple of years and then cutting? Is this potentially maybe a cynical ploy ahead of the election, or is there some other logic there?
Yeah, it's a cynical plot ahead of the
Yeah.
election. It's exactly that.
Can I make some kind of defence?
Go on.
of the government
Yeah, okay,
there?
cool.
Might be bold. I also think it is a ploy, effectively.
Sure.
But the fact that we're in a recession that is going to last until around 2024.
Sure.
I think Jeremy Hunt has seen that the worst of things is going to be in the next 2 years. So bringing the kind of or like maintaining levels of public spending for those 2 years at least can dampen the effects of the recession.
Okay.
And I think the OBR did say that because of the things he announced in the autumn statement, the recession will be shallower and there'll be less jobs lost. But there still will be a massive recession and lots of bad things.
Sorry, before we move on to the
down.
OBR, because they had some other interesting stuff to say. There's a bit more related to energy, right? Energy is one of the big drivers of inflation. Well, it is one of the drivers of inflation, and it could be even more so in the future. So what are we looking at when it comes to energy out of this?
So there's the energy price guarantee, which has existed for a while now. That was or is at about £2,500 cap for a typical household for their energy bills. That was going to end in April. They've extended that for 1 year beyond April, but they are making it less generous by increasing the cap to £3,000 from £2,500.
And as we've said many times before in videos and here, that cap is the cap for an average household. You could pay more, you could pay less.
Yeah, many households will be paying more than £3,000 for their energy bills.
Yes.
So
anything else?
They are also extending and expanding the windfall tax on oil and gas companies from 35% to 45%.
Oh, I've got 25 to 35.
Yeah,
yes, you're right. 25 to 35% on oil and gas profits, and they're also introducing a temporary tax on electricity generators of 45%.
Got it.
So there are a lot of calls to extend the windfall tax, and they seem to have kind of followed those calls, even if it's not as much as some people have been calling for. But that will raise money for the like household support payments that they've also announced. So pensioner households on means-tested benefits, people on disability benefits, they'll all be getting cash payments effectively.
To cover energy bills or just generate cost of living?
I think the idea is, to help with the cost of living, but with energy bills in mind, but, it's for them to spend it, I guess.
And finally, on kind of benefits and pensions, the triple lock has been maintained on pensions, so pensions will continue to rise. And when it comes to benefits, it's going up by 10.1% with inflation. So both of those are kind of locked in place, staying lockstep with inflation. Which is good or bad depending on your politics. Do we need to get into that?
It's that was possibly the one area or the two areas, benefits and pensions, that had they not done that, they could have faced a really serious, rebellion or backlash from their own party. But they obviously found money to do it.
Sure.
And benefits and pension will
kind
go
of
up
two
10%.
two opposite causes though. You've got pensions, which are very clearly the conservative the core conservative demographic, all the oldies who want their pensions increasing, and then you've got the benefit recipients who, I mean, you could argue is a coalition that kind of they're trying to appeal to in certain areas, but is less traditionally conservative. You can certainly imagine previous governments slashing that a lot harder than they are.
It did, there was a kind of classic Conservative government announcement as well that they were, I think, I can't remember how much money, but putting money towards making sure they would crack down on benefit fraud and so gives with one hand, take away with another, I guess.
Okay.
No, I think you're interesting because you saw that in the Daily Mail headline in response to it, was that the Tories soak the strivers.
Yeah.
And what they're saying there is essentially that the tax burden is falling on working people, and that the implication obviously is that we shouldn't be giving so generously to the non-workers, the people on benefits and the pensioners.
Aren't the pensioners the only people reading the Mail?
I agree. Well,
it's a weird attack. The benefits claimants, that's vintage Mail, but...
Well, yeah, no, I intuitively I agree with you. I mean, the Express had, there was similar demographics to the Mail, obviously, and they were actually sort of chanting. I think the front page was victory, and that's referring to the fact that they got the triple lock in there.
Well,
very weird.
We're going to have a conversation about this, I'm sure, another day. We've talked about videos around kind of the disparity between working age people, especially younger people, and more home-owning, elderly, even pensioners. So I think that whole conversation is one that's kind of fraught at the moment, especially with young people, and one will come on to another day. But interesting, those moves on kind of both sides there. Rory, you mentioned the OBR's reaction, the Office of Budget Responsibility. Do you want to run us through what their reaction has been? And also who they are quickly.
So they are an independent body that basically do economic forecasts for the government. So Jeremy Hunt asked them to publish their forecast alongside the autumn statement based on the things he announced. To put it bluntly, it was very bleak, all the things they had to say. There was this bit about how the recession is going to be shallower because of what was announced, but that's good news. But some of the things they said were just deeply, deeply bad, basically, for the UK. So
good.
The worst fall in UK living standards since records began. There's one for you. 7% drop in household incomes over the next 2 years. So that drop in living standards will apparently wipe out the past 8 years of growth in living standards. So we're back to 2013, which is fun. Taxes are rising to the highest sustained level since World War II over the next few years as well.
Okay.
So that's
good
kind of
news across the board.
picture of the state the country is in at the moment.
They also predicted a recession, obviously.
Oh, yes. They said we're in a recession now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the vibe of the rest of it certainly reflects on that.
And the last bad bit is we don't hit pre-pandemic levels of GDP until the end of 2024. So, all good stuff.
Good
that is actually amazing. That's nearly 5 years, isn't it, of essentially below 2019 levels of GDP. Fun.
And for households all the way back to 2013, how long will it take for households to get back to the same level?
It's fascinating how crap this is. I mean, I'm always sort of torn between two intuitions here, though, which is on the one hand, obviously going back 8 years in terms of disposable income is crap. And we've never had anything like this before. I mean, if you look at the graph that the OBR published, it's sort of like wiggling along, and then for the next 2 years it just goes and then sort of comes back to the wiggle. But on the other hand, I guess, I don't know, this might be the wrong take, but 2013 wasn't the end of the world. It's not like we were totally impoverished at the time. So, I don't know.
There's a tiny bit of optimism there, at least.
Yeah, it's a really
you could do a very
silver lining.
an even thinner silver lining would be there hasn't been a huge amount of growth in living standards in the last 8 years. So
there's not that much to lose. Lovely.
It's not much consolation though.
So the OBR generally negative, Zach aggressively positive. What was the reaction from Labour?
They didn't like what was announced, basically. They framed it as the government taking from the pockets of workers in Britain, and says they should have taxed more heavily the wealthier. Obviously things like the windfall tax extension and expansion were things Labour had been calling for, but I think they still say they could have done it more. It's an interesting one with Labour because there's been some talk that the Conservatives have kind of set a trap for Labour by pushing the worst of things till after the election or till the year of the election. But maybe I don't know if that's a deliberate trap or not, but I don't think that is a realistic, I can't see that working at all when you've got things like the worst drop in living standards on record, 8 years of growth wiped out. You can't get past those things.
Themselves
exactly.
I feel.
I think it's an interesting one for Labour because I think that whatever they might say, however much they might protest against it, in distributional terms, this is quite similar to what a Starmer government would do.
Sure.
And it's very similar to what sort of Tony Blair would focus on. So you ring fence education, you ring fence health, and then distributionally you are taxing the wealthiest the most heavily, and you're in fact protecting the bottom decile. But I think that while it is similar to what Starmer probably would do, Rory's right. It doesn't really matter. He can just keep on going. We're only in this shithole because you've had 12 years of Tory government and it hasn't worked. And it doesn't really matter whose fault it is. If you preside over the biggest fall in living standards in modern history, you're not going to win the next election.
Okay, so that was Labour's response. And we've also kind of touched on the Conservative response already when it comes to the Mail and the Express. But has it been supported by the government's own party, or has there been some backlash from Tories too?
Generally, I think they have supported it. They might not be, they're not going out cheering about the tax rises, but there's no sign that there'll be anything could be defeated or anything. There have been some people who, Jacob Rees-Mogg is one example, who has spoken out saying government should, I think he said Jeremy Hunt's taken the easy option of raising taxes. And he thinks government efficiency should be looked at instead of raising taxes. But that's, one wing of the party. Interestingly, though, Esther McVeigh, who's a Conservative MP and someone who Jeremy Hunt, in the leadership election earlier this year, Jeremy Hunt said if he won, he would make Esther McVeigh his deputy prime minister. She has said she can't support the tax rises unless he scraps things like High Speed 2, the rail project, and other, I think she called them vanity projects. So, there's some degree of discomfort in the Conservative Party about the massive tax rises, but I don't think enough to stop them going ahead with it.
Okay.
I was just going to say, anything I'd say on that is that I think the people who will be most upset by this are the Jacob Rees-Mogg sort of Liz Truss-ites. And they've been subdued by Truss's atrocious premiership. But fundamentally, they sort of do have a point in that Hunt has gone for the easy option so far as he's covered the fiscal hole by just raising taxes instead of trying to structurally reform the UK economy to make it essentially more resistant to these sort of shocks. But at the moment, they don't really have any political capital because Truss did so terribly.
Did so badly, They won't be down forever, though.
No, exactly. Give it 2024, they'll be furious.
Exactly. One last kind of grouping to pay attention to, the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Do you want to outline quickly who they are too, and also what their take has been? Yeah,
they are basically a think tank that looks at the economy. They do lots of, it's kind of not like the OBR, but they whenever there's a budget or an autumn statement, a fiscal event or whatever we call it now, they always will analyse it and put out a lot of research on it. They were pretty bleak as well, much like the OBR. No. So they said that we've entered a new era of higher taxes. Their main thing, though, was pointing out about, what I think they call it middle Britain, people on middle incomes, how they'll be, hit pretty hard because they don't qualify for the support that people on lower incomes or benefits might get. They weren't that impressed with it overall. Mainly because a lot of the things that were announced, like the stealth tax rises, they're not. None of the headline rates of tax were increased. It was all done through this kind of backdoor method. And Paul Johnson, who's the head of the IFS, said that they were basically raising badly designed taxes, which will be more economically damaging than raising sensibly reformed ones. So rather than trying to change the system and improve it, it's just tinkering around the edges to try and raise money in the short term. So sorry, bringing the mood down.
Glowing review.
No, it's an interesting one though, because with that sort of criticism, and you get that from a lot of the independent think tanks in the UK, they've all said like, this is not a good budget. And they've all pointed out, terrible fallen living standards, recession, la-di-da-di-da. But I think that basically I'm going to defend Hunt here. The political reality is such that he can't really engage in a full-on, reform of the inefficient tax system. He can't really engage in any of the more essentially economically sensible reforms to the UK economy. He just doesn't have the political time or space. He's got 2 years before he needs to somehow make sure the Tories don't get completely wiped out at a general election. All he can do really is tinker around the edges. And I think actually, at least by Tory standards, this was quite a progressive budget, and in that sense probably better than what we could have expected. A lot better than Kwarteng and Truss, for example.
I think you raised an interesting point with that about how he doesn't have the time or really the power to make those reforms. But I was thinking about that when it comes to the spending cuts and the tax rises that are kind of being deferred down the line. I just don't see how it's possible for a government now to say we'll do these things 2 years in the future, given what's happened just in the last few months. Like I think it's 55 days since the mini budget, and we've got the same party but a different government who've done a complete reversal of what's happened. So I don't know how they can possibly say this is what we're going to do in.
You were defending this thing, the deferral earlier in the podcast.
You both defended.
No, I completely agree with you. Also, the fact that there's probably the bookies have like Labour, 90% chance of winning the next election, and Hunt is legislating for after 2024.
I guess you can't just say, well, we'll do this up until 2024, then it's not our responsibility. I guess you can't really say that.
I mean, you can't, but everyone knows it. It's amazing that everyone's accepted this. Like, we're all playing a game here, being like, 2024, we're going to cut down public spending. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have a completely different government in 2024, and God, no one knows what the macroeconomic situation will be by then. I think it's just more that the markets have reacted relatively well, just because in terms of tone and vibe, Hunt gives off more sensible vibes than Truss did. Truss gave off loony vibes, and also he's just at least explicitly stated his intention to eventually bring down debt as a percentage of GDP, and not even bring it down, just get it on a downwards trajectory by 2028, which is not the same as bringing it down, but whatever. That was another thing, by the way, that he got away with slightly. Sorry, is that the whole thing when Truss's budget went down terribly with markets, all of the analysts were saying, "Oh, this is because debt as a percentage of GDP is increasing for the foreseeable future, and that just essentially makes UK government borrowing unsustainable in some sense, whatever unsustainable really means." And Hunt, when he stood up, said, "I've got new fiscal rules." His new fiscal rule didn't say that debt had to be falling as a percentage of GDP. It said that at the end of the 5-year cycle, debt had to be falling as a percentage of GDP. So if you look at what's supposed to happen, the OBR project's supposed to happen for the next 5 years, it goes up. And then it just it goes from 97.6% of GDP to 97.3% in the last year. It's nothing, and it jumps from about 80% now, 80% a year ago, up to 97% in the next couple of years. And yet, just basically because he's got better vibes than Truss, everyone's gone like, finally, a sensible chancellor.
It's the vibes-based economy.
It's the vibes-based
economy. Politics is all about vibes.
Listen, it's just, fair enough.
So, we've obviously touched on the election already. 2024, it's a while away, but it is closing in. Like, there's only so much change that can be made. They've been in power for 12-ish years at this point. So 2 years, nothing in Conservative times. So what does all of this mean for the next election? It's kind of specifically the budget, but also just the broader economic situation. You're both seemingly fairly confident that it's a lost cause already for the Tories. But what does all of this mean for the Conservatives?
Go on.
It doesn't look good going into 2024 for them, based on... I think any party in government after 12 years is going to struggle to get another term based on just fatigue, I guess. But when you have those 12 years and then a prolonged recession, and also the worst fall in living standards since records began, those aren't things that you look at and feel confident about.
They're not winning arguments. No. You're not putting those on your posters.
No.
I think also, to make it even worse, basically the OBR's projecting is that the recession, we won't return to pre-pandemic levels of growth before the end of 2024. So it's worth reminding ourselves that the Bank of England said that wouldn't happen until something like 2025, 2026. And unfortunately for the UK, historically, the more pessimistic projections have usually been the more accurate ones. So sure, while we might be talking about the terrifying prospect of a 2024 recession, if the Bank of England's correct, it could be even longer. Things could be even worse than we think they are.
Do you remember when you were optimistic a minute ago?
Hey, listen, again, I think
it could be great though.
We are dropping off from frankly, a very high benchmark, at least by international/global standards.
Okay.
So I think that's worth taking into account. I'm not trying to trivialize.
We've got some falling to do.
We have a lot of falling to do, basically. I'm not trying to trivialize the fall in disposable income. I'm just trying to provide a tiny silver lining to what is otherwise a very bleak picture. But
bleak picture for the Conservatives though.
Yeah, terrifyingly bleak picture for the Conservatives. As we mentioned a second ago, I thought this was actually, given the political and economic constraints, a reasonably good budget, a reasonably sensible budget. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't really matter whose fault it is. If you preside over the biggest fall in living standards in modern history, you just get punished at the election. And given that it looks like the poll ratings have stabilised already, and the Labour have a 22 point lead on the Tories. If over the next 2 years living standards fall and people get more and more fed up with the Tories, you can expect that gap to widen even further, and that puts the Tories on track for less than 100 seats at the next general election. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that is a plausible scenario at this point. I do think that what will decide whether or not the Tories face just a massive loss at the next election or electoral oblivion at the next election will be whether or not a new party to the right of them can establish itself. Because if a new party to the right can establish itself and further squeeze that Tory vote, then you could see them getting sort of 20% at the next election. And that's the difference for Tories. They need to get 30% if they want to survive, and 20% is proper wipeout territory. And there's definitely an appetite for that sort of party amongst some contingent of the Conservative voting base. Again, in that video we're about to release, we mentioned that there was a new poll out the other day for the Times, or maybe the Telegraph.
Times, I think.
Times, suggesting that 28% of people, including about 40% of Conservative voters, would vote for a new Nigel Farage party.
Yeah.
There's clearly a massive appetite for it. And again, it's a vibes thing. It's because Sunak just doesn't have the same sort of like hardcore anti-immigrant Brexity vibes that Johnson and Truss had. So there is this political space to the right of him that someone like Farage could capitalise on. And you can see the outlines of that appearing already. Like, it's going to be focused very heavily on immigration, which has become a bit of a weak spot for the Tories.
Yeah.
Probably focused quite heavily on anti-net zero stuff, which I think as fuel duty comes in, that might might be more of a thing. And also very heavily focused on Brexit, which people still feel is not going very well. And it does look like Sunak wants to take a softer line than some of his predecessors, just because he's sensible and he knows that actually we don't have the political or economic space to fight a war with the EU at the moment. So I think, that's really the big question for the Tories, is whether or not Farage or some Farage equivalent pops up on the right of them.
Anything to add to that, Rory, or do you agree generally?
I do agree generally. Very good analysis. I was going to say, even though it's looking bad for the Conservatives, I don't necessarily think it's like great for Labour, because I mean it's good in the sense that I think they'll win the next election based on what we know now, but it's not going to be, an election campaign is not going to be easy, because they can say the last 12 or I guess it'll be 14 years by then have been bad and all these things have happened, but they're going to inherit whatever the economic situation is, and I think Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has her own fiscal rules that she says she'll stick to, because Labour are desperate to prove that they're sensible on the economy and stuff. So they're going to struggle to really make certain commitments on spending and investment, I think, without actually knowing what the situation is at the next election. So I don't think it's necessarily an easy job for them.
But I think that cuts both ways. So I've been thinking about this a bit, because it has echoes of 2008, doesn't it? When the Labour just have an issue with the economy, people don't trust them so much, right? And it was a bad economy, and so people went, we want the safe bet of the Tories. But I just feel, because obviously the incumbents are the Tories this time around, the Tory line here is going to be, you can't do all the fun stuff you're promising because we economy for you, which I just don't think is a good campaigning tactic. I can't imagine people buying into that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sorry, in my head, I'm just imagining like the debate going on. Keir Starmer saying we're going to do all this fun stuff, and Rishi Sunak saying, but you can't do the fun stuff because I it. So anyway, you see what I mean?
I see what you mean.
Yeah,
well, it'll be fun.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
We'll still be here in 2024. We'll still be talking.
There'll be yet another 3 Conservative Prime Ministers by then as well. So.
Ben will be back by then as well.
We'll see. Yeah. He's always on holiday when stuff happens.
That's
so
true.
Who knows? Anyway, that was The Bigger Issue. The Bigger Issue is a production of TLDR News for 326 Limited. It was hosted by me, Jack Kelly, with Zach Michaelis and Rory Taylor. For copyright 2022. Goodbye.